Fabulous. It is so good to see so many of you here today. Thank you for making the Forge part of your Sunday today. If you're watching online, a special welcome to you as well. Really, really glad that you're joining with us. I want to ask you a question. But have you ever stumbled across something which seems ordinary, but then you discover that actually it has great value? Maybe a grandparent has handed down some jewelry and you've kind of just had it in a box or you've kept it as a brooch or something and you thought, I'm never going to wear that. But then you actually discover that it's worth loads and loads of money. Or maybe that you've been looking through like either your parents or family LPs, because everyone has them. They just have them in the loft normally. But anyway, you have a search through and you discover that there is a very rare Beatles vinyl album, which you discover is worth thousands of pounds. Or maybe there's a painting that's been up on the wall that you've never really taken any notice of, but then suddenly you realize that actually there is extraordinary value to the painting. I tell you, that is a dream I think we all have at times. Do you know what? TV is littered with shows where people are trying to find something of great value. I've just put a few up there. So you've got Antiques Roadshow, you've got Fake or Full. Fiona Bruce is very interested in this, isn't she? Have you noticed that she hosts at least two of those? You've got the detectorists there who are obviously searching through the land and that. And then you've also got up there, you've got Del Boy, who finally became a millionaire because he found a watch, a really ordinary looking watch in his garage that was worth £6.2 million. Now, isn't it a dream that we all have, that we would discover something of great value? But actually, why? Why would we dream that? Why is it that actually there's something inside of us that would long for that to happen? Well, I think it's because I think it's because it brings something that we long for. That we long for security, we long for peace, we long for a bright future. And so if we could find something of great value, then that might bring that to our lives. Because I think that's a common kind of thought for many of us, I think it's why Jesus told a story that links in with that very longing that we have. Now, remember, Jesus told lots of stories. And his stories weren't just for entertainment, although people would flock to listen to him because he was a great communicator. But actually, Jesus told stories because he always had a kind of a second meaning to the story. He was always trying to say something else through the story that he told, which is why his stories are called parables and not just stories. And a parable is a brief story with realistic characters and events that convey a moral or a spiritual lesson. So we've been looking at several of Jesus' parables over this summer. And today we are looking at, I think is probably one of the shortest that he ever told. So are you ready? We're going to go for it. This is the parable that he said. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure that a man discovers hidden in a field. In his joy, he hid it again and sold everything that he owned to get enough money to buy the field. Boom, that's the story. There you go. Inspired? Probably not at the moment. Okay, let's go on. Jesus wants to reinforce this, and so he tells another story which is just as short, but it had exactly the same meaning. He says this, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant on the lookout for choice pearls. And when he discovered a pearl of great value, he sold everything he owned and bought it. So Jesus starts both of these short little stories with this phrase, the kingdom of heaven is like. In fact, he starts loads of his stories with the kingdom of heaven is like. So in order to understand the short story that Jesus told, we have to understand what the kingdom of heaven is so that we know what it's like. I love how a man called John Ortberg described this in his book, The Life You've Always Wanted. He went on to explain it this way. He says, I bet many of you, if not all of you, will have either read or watched fairy tales at some point in your life? We love them. We love fairy tales because, one, they make us dream about happy endings because they all lived happily ever after. Yes, that's the kind of the final phrase of those fairy stories. In other words, that good wins over evil. Secondly, the central characters get transformed. And so you get Cinderella there, who is kind of having to clean out fires. She's wearing scruffy clothes, all of that. And suddenly she becomes the belle of the ball. Or you've got the frog that turns into the prince. Are you following? Do you remember some of these stories? Yeah, okay, that's good, that's good. And then the third one is the enchanted world is not too far away. And so in these stories, you can step into a wardrobe and suddenly discover that you're in Narnia. You can walk through the woods and you suddenly come across a house that has 7 dwarfs living in it. In other words, this enchanted world is closer than people think. So we tell these stories and they're told over and over again in lots and lots of different ways. And they're told for entertainment, but actually if you look at the stories, if you look at the messages, beneath the surface, what they do is they echo the big story of God. So, good winning over evil, a rescuer coming to save, characters that get changed, and that this kind of mystical or enchanted world is closer than we think. And John Ortberg, in his book, he just concludes it by saying, the one difference between fairy tales in the gospel is that, of course, the gospel's true and that fairy tales aren't. But Jesus began his ministry with this announcement that this other world, this other kingdom, this other dimension to life is closer than people realize. This is how he starts off his communication at the beginning of his 3-year ministry. This is what he says. From that time on, Jesus began to preach that repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. So what was the good news that Jesus was saying? He was saying this, that this world that we live in, this broken world, this troubled world as we know it, this is not the whole story. There is more for you and I to experience. So the kingdom of heaven is a place where God reigns, where God transforms lives for good, where God can take the ordinary and turn it into something extraordinary, where God's presence is, where his forgiveness is, where peace is found. It's where a certain hope regarding our destiny is awaiting. And often people would think that the kingdom of heaven is far away and you go to it when you die. But Jesus is saying, no. We can experience God's reign, God's rule, his peace, his love, his forgiveness. You can experience it now, today. And most extraordinary is that it's available for you. It's available for you. It's available for you. Whether you call yourself religious or spiritual or not, what Jesus is saying is that for every single one of us, the kingdom of heaven, God's reign, is at close at hand and is available to us. So Jesus says this, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovers hidden in a field. In other words, the kingdom of heaven is, well, it's like treasure, so therefore it has so much value to it. It has huge worth. Sometimes I think when people look at faith, it can seem that it's boring, it's irrelevant, it's just churchy stuff, and that people just look at the surface and they're not inspired, they don't see any life change, and so they would say, why would I want to explore that? And what Jesus is saying within this very short parable, with this very short story is, yet below the surface of all of that, there is something incredible. What Jesus is saying, that beneath the surface there is treasure, a love that every one of us desperately searches for in life, a peace that goes way beyond just nice circumstances. A joy about life despite the difficulties that we go through. A forgiveness when those feelings of shame and guilt start to override in our lives. All of that is the treasure that is available for you and for me. And maybe what people have been overlooking is actually what they've been looking for all the time. Because the treasure was hidden in a field. And maybe it just, a field just looks like dirt and stones and weeds and plants. That's all it looks like. And maybe for some, that's just what faith looks like. But Jesus is saying, there's so much more. And I love the contrast between these two stories. I love the contrast because I think it explains two different ways that people discover Jesus and discover everything that Jesus wants to bring to someone's life. I love the way in which he explains it through these two stories. The first story, the man stumbles across treasure. He wasn't looking for it. He just came across some treasure. He found it hidden in a field. And so he is so excited that he goes to sell everything in order to buy the field, because whoever owns the field owns the treasure. He knows that. So therefore, he has to buy the field. The second person, the merchant, he wasn't just stumbling across pearls. He was searching. He had this all-out search to try and find the pearl of great value. And when he does, what does he do? He sells everything in order that he can have it. The treasure is so good, the pearl is so good that it warrants giving up everything else for it. I think this gives a really fabulous picture of how different people come to faith. Some people stumble across Jesus. That might be you. Maybe a friend invited you to some kind of Christian concert or a service or an event. Or maybe that you just met a Christian and they started talking to you about their own experiences of life and faith. Maybe you watched something on YouTube and you just thought, wow, it just came up in my feed. Maybe you read something or you heard a song, but there was something inside of you that drew you to Jesus and just says, I need to find out. I need to find out. You weren't looking, but you stumbled across him. That's many people's experience. But there are some people who desperately are searching to find meaning and purpose and to find what is it in life that's missing for me. One of those people is this lady here. Her name is Jackie James. I don't know, where are you, Jackie? You're just over there. Okay, thank you very much. Last August, Jackie started coming to the Forge. I was away Sarah and I were away in Australia, and we'd just seen on the WhatsApp group to say that a new person had started coming on one of the Sundays, and they said that their name was Jackie. So I was really, really pleased. So when I got back from Australia, I spoke to Jackie on the Sunday, and I said, any chance of a coffee? I'd love to find out your story. So we went out for a coffee in Costa. Advertising, free points, yeah. So we went to a coffee shop in Stowmarket, and I just said, I'd love to find out how it is that and why it is that you've come to the Forge, and tell us a little bit of your story. And she said that a number of years ago, she'd gone through a very traumatic time, and she really started a question about what the meaning and purpose to life was. And so she started exploring, and she said that she had gone to, I have to get this right, past life regression therapy. She'd been reading up about, who she was in a previous life, and she'd gone along to a therapy session to try and explore that. And then a little while later, she got into some spiritual meditation, exploring the energy centers in people's bodies, of using crystals and of using colors. And she attended, at least for a year, these meditation sessions online. But after a year, she still realized that she was still searching for meaning and purpose. And so she said that she decided to try a local church who might help her, hence she came to the Forge. And after sharing some of the things that she had been involved in and exploring, she said, I don't know what you think of all of that, Steve. Well, I think you're really searching, and I think you've come to the right place. And I said, and I think that it would be really worth you carrying on attending and coming on Alpha. And so Jackie carried on attending on Sundays, and she came onto the Alpha course. And over that time, she committed her life to Jesus. So on Easter Sunday of this year, there is Jackie being baptized. Jackie is involved in helping at Base Bites. She is here. She was here at 8 o'clock this morning. Next week, she'll be here at 7 o'clock to help set out all the chairs that you're kindly sitting on at the moment. And Jackie's life has changed. Why? Because she has found treasure. She's found what it is that she has been searching for. So if you're here today, or if you're watching online, and you've never really thought much about Jesus, maybe this could be your first time and you've just come along out of interest. The good news is that the kingdom of heaven, God's reign, everything that God has good for you in your life is available for you today. And if you're someone and you're here because you are searching and you're thinking, I don't know what to make of this. I kind of know there's something missing, but I'm not sure, and I'm trying to search to find out. The good news is that God's forgiveness, God's hope, God's unconditional love, I tell you, the kingdom of heaven is available for you. It's close at hand. That sounds great, but there has to be this question, yes, but how? How does that become my reality? Well, Jesus in these two short little stories tells us. You see, the power and the challenge of Jesus' stories is not just, oh, isn't it lovely? They found some treasure. Oh, he found a pearl. Everyone skips away happy. No. There is a huge thing that takes place for these people to grasp what it is that Jesus is offering. What does it say? That he sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field. For the merchant, what did it say? The next one, that he sold everything he owned and bought it. The treasure and the pearl in these two tiny little stories that Jesus told represents the kingdom of heaven, something of such value, of such worth to you and to me, that these two people in our stories were willing to sell everything they had in order to gain their prized possession. And I wonder what you would be willing to give up in order to receive the peace that you long for. What would you be willing to give up to experience an unconditional love that will never diminish because it's unconditional? What would you be willing to give up to live with a deep sense of joy and gratitude in your life, even when you go through those tough times? You see, the transformation available is extraordinary. Because where God's reign is, forgiveness is available. That peace, joy, unconditional love is found. That our value, our true value, is discovered. That we can hand our worries over to him. Why? Because he's trustworthy. He says he can cope with it. A new purpose in life is given, and a close relationship with him is found. This is why it's called treasure, or a pearl of great value. It is so worth chasing after. So, the treasure and the pearl were not additions to these people's lives. They gave up everything in order to gain the prize. The cost was everything, but the gain was more. I think this can sound a bit daunting, to be honest. Give up everything. What? What does that mean? But the great thing is, this was not a reluctant thing for these two people. Look what the verse says. In his joy, he's discovered treasure. So in his joy, he sells everything in order to be able to gain the treasure. The man wasn't sad about what he'd lost. He was just so excited about what he'd found. You know, when a number of years ago, Sarah and I, we'd got up in the morning and discovered that our back door was open. And we also discovered that people had been in to pay a visit to our house. We hadn't actually welcomed them, and they'd taken mobile phones and they'd taken laptops and they'd stolen other stuff too. And so we called the police. The police came out and they said, yes, you have been broken into. Which was good. Anyway, it was then handed over to them. We made an insurance claim, and I got I'd lost my old laptop, and so I got a new MacBook. And the police were brilliant because they caught the people who had broken into our house. They got back all of our stuff, and they brought it back to us. So everything that we'd lost, we'd got brought back to us. The problem is that I'd now got a second laptop. So I called the insurance company to say, what should I do? And they said, well, you can't keep both. You're going to have to give one to us. Do you know what? Giving up my old laptop was no problem whatsoever. It really wasn't. Why? Because I'd got an upgrade. I'd got an upgrade. That's what following Jesus is. It's an upgrade. You might have to give up an old way of life, but what you gain, oh boy, it is so good. You don't just lose your life, you gain real life. Jesus said, I've come that you can have life, and life that will be quite boring. No, he doesn't. He says life in all its fullness. So a man called Paul who discovered this. Paul had grown up incredibly religious. When he was 8 days old, he'd gone through the ceremony of circumcision to show that he was a true Jew. He'd been educated incredibly well. He became what's known as a Pharisee, which is one of the religious leaders. He kept all of the rules. I tell you, he was known, he was respected, he was the man. And then he met Jesus in an extraordinary way. In fact, he stumbled across Jesus because he wasn't looking for Jesus. He was looking for Jesus' followers to put into prison or to kill them. And yet, through his encounter with Jesus, he discovered treasure and his whole life was turned around. And he wrote to some of his friends in Philippi. You have this in one of the letters which he wrote and which we have in the Bible. And he says this, all the things I once thought were so important are gone from my life. Compared to the high privilege of knowing Christ Jesus as my master firsthand, everything I once thought I had going for me is insignificant. And then in the Eugene Peterson version, he calls it dog dung. We know what he's saying. That's how he considers all of that old life. He says, I've dumped it all in the trash so that I could embrace Christ. In other words, I could embrace his teaching, I could embrace his life, I could embrace everything that he wants to bring to me and be embraced by him. I guess the question that comes from this short parable, or these two short parables, I think is an uncomfortable one, but I still want to ask you today. And it's this. What are we still holding on to that needs to be let go of in order to gain and benefit from a relationship with Jesus? What are we still holding on to that we need to let go of? Jesus can't just be an addition to our lives, as that's not experiencing God's reign and rule. That says, I'm still going to be in control, but I'd like a few benefits, thank you. What Jesus is saying within this story is that it involves giving up. It involves submission. It involves surrendering our lives to him, to come under his reign. And I tell you, that is a good thing, because when we do that, we get an upgrade in life. We really do. So why hold on to bad habits and addictions when the offer for us is freedom? Why would we choose to live a life of worry when Jesus says, trust me with your concerns? Honestly, you can let go and you can trust me. This is Sarah, my wife's experience over these last few years, honestly, it has transformed her life. Others are discovering the same as they go to bed at night and to say, God, I'm so worried about this, but I'm going to hand this over to you. And I've heard people say that suddenly they're sleeping better. Why try and run your life your way with all the stress that comes with that when the creator of who you are says, I can lead you forward. I know what's best for you. So don't put all of your focus in what you've got to give up of the selling everything bit. You do have to count the cost, but honestly, focus on the prize. Focus on what God can bring to your life because of Jesus. Honestly, it's this that brings transformation. It's this that brings life. Discovering the treasure of knowing Jesus, of following him, and everything that comes through that relationship. It's life-giving. It's life-changing. It's life-enriching. And as Jesus said, it's life in all its fullness. The kingdom of heaven is near. It's available. So as the band come up and to play and to lead us in our final song, I say, don't settle for the dirt. Don't settle for a field when treasure is actually waiting for you. Don't cling to what's temporary when there is something eternal that we can gain and that's available. Don't walk past the kingdom of God when Jesus offers it to you today. You know, if you were to go home and as you were walking up the path, there was a piece of paper that fluttered and you picked it up and you had a look and you realized that you had picked up a winning lottery ticket worth millions of pounds, you would not say, oh, I'll probably have a look at that later. You would go straight away to be able to hand that in. Why? Because you know what the prize is. You wouldn't delay. What Jesus offers for every single one of us is life in all its fullness. And he says, take it today, experience it today. It's closer than you think. And maybe what you have been overlooking is actually what you've been looking for all along. I love the words of this song, which we're going to sing. Can I ask that we stand together, please? The lyrics in the second verse of what we're going to sing, it says this: you are the treasure I find, my reason for living. So let my life become an offering to the one who is worthy. You are the treasure I find. When you find it, everything else pales into insignificance of knowing Jesus.